Welcome back. We are getting ready to start the Scapulo Humeral rhythm project. That's a mouthful. But what I want you to do to start is to import the base mesh provided to you, which is basetorso.obj. And we're going to use this as the model for this session. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to essentially abduct his arm through the different ranges of motion, all on layers. So this is going to be an introduction to transpose for some of you, and also give you guys an introduction to using layers. So we'll start by getting this ready to sculpt on. Okay, so we need to essentially get this subdivided through as many subdivisions as we feel comfortable using, whatever your machine can handle readily. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get ready to subdivide them, but before I do, I want to pay attention to the stumps. Right? In past exercises, we've used Dynamesh to cut these off and make them sharp. As you can see right now, they're already kind of chopped off, at least in the base mesh. And if we smooth this now, though, as is, subdivide it, you'll see the stumps just kind of go soft. And they're not too soft, but we'd like to have them a little bit sharper than that. You can see the legs are a little bit sharper than, or a little bit softer than the arms. So I want to show you guys how to use the crease functionality in Zbrush. Essentially, it gives you the ability to make hard edges on any edges that you're going to subdivide and keep them angular while the rest of the mesh smooth. So I'm going to show you guys two ways to approach this. First will be the traditional way, kind of the classic way, which is to do visibility selection and crease the visible edges. All right, so I'm going to do this stump in isolation to show you this. So I'm going to use Control and Shift together. And you can see it's brought up Select Rectangle. I'm going to pull this out and go with Select Lasso because that's going to give me a little bit better ability to hide this. So essentially I've just done a lasso select of this stump. And in the traditional creasing workflow, you just do a visibility select of the area that you want. And then we're going to go over here and hit Crease. The thing to pay attention to is this crease levels, which essentially says that these edges will remain sharp through 15 subdivisions, which is more subdivisions than you'll be able to do, because I can guarantee nobody's machine has that much capacity, because it goes exponential through subdivisions, and 15 gets to be quite a few polygons. So really what's cool is to make it sharp, but not infinitely sharp. So a crease level of 4 or 3 even is probably good, because it will stay sharp through the first few subdivisions, and then it will get a slight radius on it as it goes higher. So you hit Crease, and what you see as a result of the crease is these little dotted lines, and I'll zoom in so maybe you can see better on the monitor. You get dotted lines around the areas that's going to crease. And if I zoom this out and subdivide, you'll see that it stays sharp through 3 subdivisions, and then it starts to go soft after that. Okay, if I turn my polyframe off, you should be able to see that we have a nice sharp edge with creases and a nice little radius on our higher subdivisions. Okay, so what we have is a really good way to crease things through visibility selection, but sometimes it's tedious to do visibility selections for everything. So like all the stumps, and it just takes a bit of time. And so what we also have the ability to do is actually crease based on edge angle. So the angles between this, essentially your stump angle, or angles between edges. And that is located in the same area on the palette, which is this crease tolerance. So if you're going to crease by edges, you can use this crease tolerance button. And if there's not anything shown or hidden, then it will crease based on angles. And I just hit the button, let me show you the polyframe. And with the default of 30, you can see that I have dots going on all the angles, the edge angles, that are greater than 30, right? And there's a few. So if we set this even lower, crease tolerance to be 1, it would crease pretty much all the edges, which is not what we want. We want the opposite of that. We want the crease tolerance to be very high, so we're only going to crease these really sharp angles. And so if I turn this to be something like 70, it means that angles greater than 70 will be creased. So if we do that, you can see it's done exactly what we want. It's creased the top for the neck, both arm stumps, and both leg stumps. So now we can subdivide this through a number of subdivisions, keep our sharp edges, and get ready to set up our layers. So in general, when we start to approach working in layers, you want to, as a rule, at least in the way that I work, subdivide your mesh to whatever you consider your working limit. And right now I'm at 814,000 polys. So every subdivision is a factor of 4, so I can probably get away with one more subdiv without it getting too heavy. So now I should be about 3 point something million. Okay, but essentially I want a lot of polygons because I want to be able to go in with clay tubes and get my nice strokes and get some resolution in the mesh. Okay, so we're going to work at that level. You can work at something lower if your machine has limitations, but everybody should be able to comfortably work at about 7 subdivs for this. Okay, so from here we're going to put a layer on, and essentially we're going to make a layer for each angle of the rotation of the arm that we have to go through. Okay, so it's going to be 0. He's pretty much at 45 already. Then we'll have 90, we'll have 135, and then we'll have all the way overhead at 180 degrees. So we're going to call this 0 degrees. And I'm just going to make the layers as I go through them. The idea is that from the start, we're going to do all our transpose at level 1, subdiv level 1, and then we'll work in the higher resolution details as we step through those. So all of our layers that we're going to put in, and I might as well just put all these in so that we have them. So it's going to be 0 degrees, 45 degrees, $90 degrees. Hey, that was cheating, wasn't it? I'm only cheating myself if I don't make a new layer. So 90 degrees, 135 degrees. Bear with me, we're almost there. And 180 degrees. So really these layers are going to work, I'm going to use them additively. So pretty much I'm going to put this guy at 0 degrees, sculpt him into 0 degrees, and then I'm going to raise the arm and turn on 45 degrees, raise the arm, record that, 90 degrees, etc. You'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. Okay, so at 0 degrees, let's hit record, and I'm going to go down here and just block in 0 degrees. So to get our arm down, we're going to use transpose, and I'm using transpose masking, which is beautiful. We saw this in earlier exercises, but with lower resolution, it's a lot more functional, right? So first I make a mask, and then I place my joint. And when you place your joint, this is a little bit where your knowledge of anatomy comes in, because you really want to place the rotation point of your transpose gizmo in the correct point for the joint that you're trying to rotate. In this instance, this is the glenohumeral joint, right, which is between the humerus and the scapula. Okay, so I'm just going to rotate this down. You can see we've got a little soft down here. Just by default, the transpose masking is blurred a bit. And actually, I prefer to control that myself. And so there's a way you can turn it off or turn it down. And that's in the preferences under transpose. You can do mask blur strength, set this down to something like 5. by default. And that will keep it a little bit sharper, so you won't get that kind of effect. Okay, so let's see, we'll just do up to there. So I'm making that selection, and then I'm control clicking on the canvas to invert it. And because I'm working in a plane, I'm going to turn perspective off just so I have orthographic view and know where everything's going. And then rotate this down. Okay, we're going to have to do a little bit of modification on all these. So I'm rotating them, and I'm going to move them down a little bit, because essentially I'm compensating for a little elevation in the clavicle by moving this guy down. When it comes to it, when we come to refining this beyond just rotation of the arms, we're going to be looking at things like pulling edges around and moving verts for the scapula to get it going in the right place. In fact, I'll do that right now with the nudge brush just to see how I would approach this. As the spine of the scapula rotates down with the arm as it descends, the scapula is going to start to go vertical. Right, so we're just going to put this in place and try to get this looking nice as a block-in. Right, so imagine these edges, kind of this border right here as your scapular border. Not entirely 100%, but broadly speaking, you can control the scapular rotation with these edges, and you nudge them around. And remember, I have nudge mapped to number 3 on my keypad, so I can quickly access it. And if that's the medial border of the scapula, spine of the scapula goes up here. The acromion is roughly out here. And then topologically, that brings us around to the clavicle, which is S-shaped, and going back to the pit of the neck. Okay, so broadly speaking, that's what this topology is intended for. And if you treat it as such, it actually becomes kind of useful for blocking things in. If you just kind of ignore the topology entirely, then you're going to make a lot more work for yourself. And this is really why I like to have a kind of a low-res proxy, a low-res representation for my sculpts at level 1. Right, so Dynamesh is great for blocking things in and doing sketches. But if you're going to do anything with transposing and moving objects through different poses, you really want to have control over the resolution of your mesh. Okay, so that's the arm rotated down. You can see that I have, if you look closely, you can see I have a little intersection here. We can do this 2 ways to pop it out. Go in and use the move brush. If I just do it naively, you can see with Alt enabled, I'm pushing the biceps in as I'm pulling the lats and the serratus out. In my marking menu, I have mask topological. And if I do this a little bit, I have to tweak the settings a little bit, but it's giving me mostly the desired effect. So you can do it that way, or you can use a transpose mask, which is also what I do frequently, is I'll just do a quick drag select and get the mask where I want it, and then I can pop this out. Okay, we can refine all those sorts of details as we get further along. But this is going to give us arm down to pretty much arm at 0 degrees. So stepping up, because I'm going to sculpt these additively, I'm going to leave 0 degrees on, leave record mode, and then turn 45 degrees on. So essentially 45 degrees is going to be an additive rotation on top of my 0 degrees. So hit record for this, go down, and pretty much we're almost undoing what we've just done, but it's okay because I want to treat this additively and it's part of the exercise. Okay, so roughly rotation. We're going to put this out here a little bit further. Roughly something like this to get to 45 degrees. We're going to start to get a tiny elevation of the clavicle as we go out, but I'm not going to pay it much attention right now. And likewise, we're going to get a tiny bit of deviation in the scapula. But as you look at the reference, you'll see that it's not much. So we're going to leave that alone as well. I'm going to take this out a tiny bit further, so we're at 45 degrees. Okay, so there's that. And then we'll likewise block in 90 degrees. Hit record. And 90 degrees is going to be a little bit more complex because 90 degrees is where everything starts to happen. We start to get elevation in the clavicle. We get kind of our maxed out rotation in the glenohumeral joint. And we get about 30 degrees of deviation in the scapula. All right, so we have a lot of things to do on this particular rotation. But first, let's get the scapula, or sorry, the humerus to where it needs to be. And really, it starts to go about to here before it's locked out. I'm just going to tweak it in a tiny bit. Actually, we'll leave it. And from there, we have rotation in the clavicle and rotation in the scapula. So I'm just going to tuck this in really quickly and get it back to be something that's not insulting to me as I look at it. Because we know as the arm raises, the pecs kind of go thin and stretch a little bit as they have to go further to their insertion. Likewise, this is okay because actually we do get some flaring in here. But I might have taken this a little bit too far. Okay, and again, we'll compare all this against our reference to make sure we're in the right place as we go forward. Kind of the full elevation of the clavicle or the scapula, rotation, and all those things. Okay, so that's at 90. Actually, before I go all the way back up, step down and just make my clavicle solid. Okay, and turn him off. And you can see as I turn these off, I'm rotating the arm through 15 degrees at a time. So this one in particular is interesting. We expect something to happen. We expect the right thing to happen when we hit on and off. And that is to get some elevation in the clavicle. And if we have this around the back, we expect the scapula to start to deviate as per the scapulohumeral rhythm. Okay, so that's roughly doing the right thing. We'll fine tune it, like I said, later. 135 degrees is next. And 135 degrees is about where we get maximum elevation of the clavicle, right, before it starts to rotate inward on itself. Okay, so again, we're going to have to do a kind of a complex mask. I'm going to do like a half body mask to bring me into the midline. And then I will control add to bring it up like this. The topology is not our friend right here because of the flow of edges going over. It's masking the underside of the arm, so I'm going to invert the mask. Then I'm going to control add to the arm like so. Invert it back. And just see how this looks around the back side. And don't know if I just helped myself with that one. I think, let's see. We have a little too much scapula masked there. So I'm going to invert this and see. I might actually paint this even. I know that's absurd, but sometimes just want to go in with the paint and really control it. Single click. Back to transpose, invert it again, and let's see what happens as we elevate the clavicle. Okay, so really the end point of this doesn't matter. The important thing is that we have this, our transposed line starting roughly on the head of the clavicle, the rotation point, and we're going to be at about, make sure we add a little bit more to the neck stump. Starting to rotate. Okay, so So to about here. And we do get a tiny bit of rotation backwards in the clavicle right now. That's going to be really hard for us to do, but let's see what we can do with it. Let's just see what happens if we do it like this. Pretty much, if we rotate it naively right now, we're going to rotate this big block with it, so we're going to mask that up. Invert, get our arm back. And sorry for the intricacies of this, go in with the pen and hit that. Okay, so we're going to put some of the backwards rotation in the clavicle. Again, you want to look almost on axis for the gizmo to make sure that you're kind of along the right rotation planes. And then if you grab the front, grab the middle, or you can see that's what the rotation does. Okay, so I'm just showing you for effect. We'll have to fine tune that as we get to sculpting this. Okay, and we're going to get a little more rotation in this joint, a tiny bit as it goes higher. And we will do by hand a little bit of nudge here to get about 15 more degrees of rotation in the scapular border. Okay, to pull these down to kind of represent what happens when we rotate this. Remember, as we rotate this up and we start to get past the point where the clavicle rotates, we start to see a chromium process in the back view, right? And that's the magic bit, is that this starts to rotate back towards us. Okay. And again, more work to be done to kind of make an armpit. And essentially, when the arm pulls up like this, you're starting to get the muscles stretched thinner. All the muscles through the chest and through the back are thin, and you start to get a sense of rib cage, the volume of the rib cage underneath, kind of separate from the shoulder girdle. So we really have to get a sense that keep these things kind of contoured. Okay, so that's the arm going up to 135, roughly. Make it happier. Because 135 degrees is 135 degrees. Should be a little bit more. Okay, and lastly is 180 degrees, and this is the hard one. This is where he's all the way overhead. And again, remember additive, so I need to keep my 135 on, and then I will build this one on top of it. Okay, so this is where we start to get, essentially, the clavicle rotates backwards, the scapula rotates backwards and slides around the thorax a little bit, and the humerus rotates forward in its joint to kind of relieve the tension between the tuberosity of the humerus and the acromion process, where they're kind of bound together in this particular pose at 135 degrees. Everything is locked up. And so we have a bit of work to do to get this up to 180 degrees. Okay, to get the arm overhead, we have to do a few things, and it doesn't involve just rotating the arm in the joint right here, because that's not quite going to do what we need. So what we really want to do is try to get a mask that's going to be scapular. Well, let's do it like this. We'll start with the arm going up to here, and what we'll do is we will rotate it on axis, right? So we're going to have to put a joint down through the axis of the humerus, and we're going to pull it down until it's sitting right where it needs to be, kind of right where the socket it would be. And we'll look down the axis of the arm to make sure that we're okay. And then we're going to rotate it. And so really when you put your arms overhead, if you raise your arms out to the side to where they kind of lock, you have to start to rotate your elbows forward to get your arms up overhead any further, right? So what we're going to do is we have to start to do something like this, right? So that kind of is going to free the socket here, and it's going to allow us to rotate it up. But it also kind of coincides, you can see as I rotate this, the front deltoid rotates back, and all of this is kind of enabled as well by the clavicle rotating back, like we said. And so we'll address that in a second, but right now we're going to just take this and give it that extra bit of rotation. Okay, all of this is going quite sloppy down here. We'll address that in a second. The clavicle now, to rotate it, we don't really need to do it visually because we have quite a low resolution mesh. But what's going to happen is essentially the clavicular section of the pecs is going to stack up and rotate backwards as the clavicle rotates backwards. So I'm just going to kind of adjust the flow of some of these edges to more or less indicate what's going to happen, and we'll address the form of this rotation backwards sculpturally when we get to sculpting at the higher subdivisions. Really, we're just blocking right now. So remember, this is going to be where all of this goes really thin. This is kind of the extreme of what you could expect for the chest inserting into the arm. So all of this is going to go quite thin, and it's going to span out to the arm. Likewise, the back, I just need to tuck all of this in. We're still going to need armpits. I'm using the move brush in kind of push-pull mode, so with Alt modifier on, push the armpit in. Okay, and what's going to happen here is kind of as a result of all of this, the scapula is going to rotate down a little bit and out over the side of the thorax. So I'm going to try to do this with a pen mask just to be very careful about it. Up to the acromion, all this is going to rotate down and forward. So this could be a little bit awkward, but it could be a good result as well. So I'll invert that, blur it, and then the transpose line is going to be something like this. And it's gone. But essentially, we want to kind of do it down the spine of the scapula. And you can almost get a feel for scapula there. So you can almost see the acromion start to rotate back. And we'll do that, and then we'll slide it down like this. And another bit of rotation. We'll adjust the planes sculpturally as we go, but that's kind of where we want to be. Kind of just setting this up. And with that rotated back and down, it kind of frees us up to elevate the arm a little bit more. Without totally breaking everything. Right, and as I finish this, I'll just do a naive rotation of this arm all the way up to 180 degrees to show you that all this setup is kind of necessary to make sure that the arm does the right thing. Okay, and now let's just kind of mask all the way up to the chromium. And if you look at the reference, his arm is way too far back. Kind of have to rotate it forward this way. Even a little bit more. And then let me make sure that my joint is sitting at the right location as far as its depth into the arm. I'm going to redraw this just so that we're clear. So down the axis of the humerus. And then I'm going to turn to an orthogonal view and drop it into the humerus. Okay, so that's that. And now I'm going to crank it overhead and almost all the way up. Okay, so that last bit of rotation is roughly what we need to get this to 180 degrees. And again, that same rotation is going to put the last finishing touches on this part of the clavicle as well. So overhead pose is not simple, but it's good to understand how all of these things interact in order to kind of get it to be convincing. And this is just going to really give us the scaffolding to start to put the anatomy onto. And it will actually make our job really easy because we'll have correspondence between the edge flow and we'll have correspondence between the anatomy as well then. Okay, so this is going to be the front deltoid popping up here. And all this is going to be kind of the chest muscle bulging, going straight across. I'll have to tuck some of this in. But you kind of in your mind know that you get a nice flare out here. And sculpturally it's probably just a little bit too high, where we have the latissimus dorsi and the teres major coming across. Right, and all this stuff will be kind of addressed later as we kind of fine-tune and start to look into the anatomy. Okay, so that's rotating this through 180 degrees. I will quickly step back through the layers, turn perspective on. And we should see convincing, somewhat convincing, first pass block at rotating these through 180 degrees. Okay, so it's going to be just stepping backwards. Okay, probably 0 degrees is the least convincing right now, actually. But we'll fix that by adjusting the planes and everything as we go. Okay, and from the back view, some of this will need to be tweaked, but it's our starting point. And as we move forward, we'll reference our photographs and our model and make sure all of this is working correctly. Okay, but broadly speaking, that's how we're going to use transpose and layers to get this to do the right thing. One last thing, if you really wanted to go crazy, is that you could mirror this across through the other layers so that we have both sides articulating. And since we've only modified level 1, we should be able to just do a mirror on level 1 and it should all be fine. So under deformation, Smart Resim is the guy, and you'll want to mask the half of the model that you want to keep. Otherwise it'll do an average. Okay, so there's arms down. and level 1. And likewise, you can proceed through the other levels. I'll just show you quickly level 2. Go to level 2. Smart Resim, and so on and so forth. So if we do this through our whole model, we'll get symmetrical arms. Okay, so that is how we're going to proceed with this exercise. From here, we're going to have to actually really go in and impose our methodology that we started to use, which is block in landmarks, measure proportions, and then start to block in the flow of the anatomy. So that will be for the next lecture. Okay, thank you.